Hello. Today I wanted to share with you my journey through short scale basses. For decades I played standard scale 34 and 35 inch long bass guitars, both 4 and 5 and 6 string. But unfortunately, due to physical limitations and physical illness, I had to make a change about 5 or 6 years ago. I have an underlying autoimmune condition that has affected my skin, joints, and big muscles. So big muscles in the arms and big muscles in the legs. So playing a 35-inch 5-string just became far too physically taxing for me and became too uncomfortable to play. And I'm a huge advocate for never playing in pain. Music has to be fun. And if it becomes painful to play your instrument, it's no longer fun. So I really had to find a way to make things more comfortable for me to play and also be actually able to play the instrument for an extended period of time. And that's how I ended up settling on short scale basses. My very first short scale bass was a Fender Mustang Pawn Shop series. It was red, it had a white racing stripe, and had that gigantic Gibson type humbucker in it. That bass had a great neck and it played very fast and very smoothly. But my biggest gripe with it was the humbucker. The output was far too hot for me, and based on how I play and the music I play, the tone was just too hot and too compressed. And I needed a bigger dynamic range out of it. I got better luck rolling the volume knob back just a little bit. But unfortunately, whenever you play and when you move the bass around, that volume knob would just kind of creep in either direction, resulting in volume and tonal differences. And that was unfortunately enough for me to not be able to hold on to that bass. The next short scale bass I ended up with was this Fender Mustang here. This was part of their PJ Offset series, made in Mexico. This was the very first generation that came out. And I gotta say, even though this bass is not very expensive at all, I love this thing. And it has appeared on numerous albums with me. It's appeared live with me. I love this thing. I did, however, need to make a few modifications to it to make it suit me better. The first thing I did was I rewired the pickups. The bridge jazz pickup, for me, just tonally did not fit the bill. Again, this is purely tonal subjective taste. But for me, it was far too nasal. And I think on a short scale bass, there's just not enough string orbit and enough string movement back here to produce a more pleasant sound to my ears. So what I ended up doing was I disconnected the J pickup and I disconnected the switch. This was a 3-way switch that allowed you to select between the pickups. So what I've done now is I have this P pickup wired with a shorter wire straight to the volume knob and then into the tone, and then output jack. And I've completely bypassed this switch. So now this is one of those Lee Sklar type producer switches. Doesn't do anything. The other tonal modification I made was I swapped out the original bridge for one of these Fender vintage style bent plate bridges. These have the vintage style slotted saddles. These sound quite different to my ears compared to the stock bridge. There's a tamer high end and the sustain is a little bit shorter. I know there's been a trend over the years to go for high mass bridges for increased sustain. But for the sound I was looking for, I actually wanted a shorter note. So going to these vintage style bridges really achieved that for me. This is one of my favorite bridges here and it fit perfectly. I have this strung up with Tomastic Infeld flat wounds 100 to 43. And this bass sounds like this. it plays quite evenly up and down the neck, and all 4 strings sound quite balanced. I love this thing. Moving on, we have my lovely landing fretless bass. For years, I spent most of my fretless playing time on an MTD 534 5-string tuned E to C, and also a Gary Willis model Ibanez fretless. And that thing was fantastic. It sounded amazing. But again, both of those were 34 inch scale. I had both of them strung with a high C string. But unfortunately, playing 5 strings tuned high, playing a low F on the low E string was unfortunately for me like way out here, and it just became uncomfortable to play. Fretless short scales are relatively hard to find, especially on the used market. But I found this one through Chicago Music Exchange purely by accident, and I'm really glad that I got it. Like a lot of my other basses, I did make some modifications to this one. This bass originally came with active EMGs. It had an active PJ set, and it had the active bass treble EMG controls. There was a 3-way switch here allowing for pickup selection. I played EMGs for years. In fact, my first bass had EMG J set, and I played that for decades. That was my only bass, and I did everything with it. But as I've grown older, I've leaned more towards preferring passive pickups and no electronic preamps at all. I prefer to have my tone modifications done outboard, but provided with a passive signal. To me, in my ears, I just find I can get a more organic tone. But again, that's entirely subjective. But I'm really glad I got this bass. This is a ash body to a maple neck, and it has an ebony fretboard. So it has the same wood recipe as my Gary Willis. And for me, in my ears, I think in a fretless bass, that is the perfect wood recipe. So this bass is wired entirely passive, so the volume and tone, these are dummy knobs. They don't actually do anything. I only have the P pickup wired to the electronics. This J pickup is there purely for cosmetic reasons. This P pickup came from a very generous friend of mine who lives down the street. He had a vintage Ibanez P pickup in his shop. Oddly enough, he had swapped this out for an active EMG P. So he had this P kicking around, and he put it in and soldered it and installed it all for me. And I think it has really brought this bass to life and tonally fits what I'm hoping to achieve. So here's this bass. I usually run the tone knob at 25%, volume wide open. I love this bass. Now, I prefer P-bass pickups myself, and I'm not really a J-bass guy. However, some songs just require the J-bass tone, and that is how I ended up with, or rather how I sought to find a good short scale J-bass. This is the Atelier Z Ken Ken signature model. This is the short scale version of his signature bass. This, I believe, is a basswood body, maple neck, maple board, stock Atelier Z J pickups. I made the same modification to this bass that I did to my Fender Mustang, and that is I put the Fender vintage style slotted saddle bent steel bridge on this bass, and thankfully the screw holes lined up perfectly and it just slotted right in. This is a passive bass, so volume tone. I typically run both volumes wide open and the tone anywhere between 25 to 50%. Wide open is a little too clangy and bright to my ears, but that's just what I like. The mirrored pickguard is a bit much for me. Maybe I'll switch it out to a black one in the future, but this is a great sounding J bass. Here's how this one sounds. I have this bass strung with Dunlop Super Bright Nickel. These are now my favorite round wound strings. I played DR stainless steel strings on my F-Bass BN4 for years, but now as my hands have really gotten more fragile and the skin on my fingertips more painful, the DRs became a little too stiff for me to play. Although I really enjoyed them tonally, they became painful to play. So I got into these Dunlop Super Bright Nickels, and I can get pretty close to that DR sound, but they're quite a bit more slinky or flexible. I don't know how they do it, but that's just what I find. These are 40 to 100, so slightly lighter than your standard round wound sets. But these are rounds. I forgot to mention that I also have Tomastic flat wounds on the landing fretless as well, 43 to 100. So same as the Fender Mustang. Great bass. To get the low B string sound, I ended up with this Cort 5 string. It's the A5 Custom Z model. It is an exotic wood bass, neck through construction, Z from Custom Z, presumably for the zebra wood top. This bass came to me upgraded with US Bartolini MK5 humbucker pickups and the MK5 preamp, which I gotta say is a huge upgrade from the typical MK1 pickups you get in Ibanez and Cort basses. So I quite enjoy these Bartolinis. String through neck construction. The only modification I made to this bass was I made it entirely passive. So I run this bass wide open volume. There's your pickup selector. This was a preamp on and off switch. There it is, right there. Typically, with the up position is passive, down is active. I ended up getting that reversed because I kept hitting it in between songs or during songs, and it got annoying for me. So I don't run the preamp at all. I run this entirely passive into my Line6. And here's this bass. Should also mention I have this bass tuned down an entire step, and I put a page capo on the 2nd fret to make it a short scale 5 string for me. I like the pages the best, having experimented with many capos, because I find I get the most even pressure down on the fret, mimicking a nut as much as possible with this. So here's the low B string. I should actually have it plugged in. So it's got a nice clear ring in the low end. Great bass. And this brings us to the newest star of the show. When I turned 40, I decided as a birthday present to myself that I would have a bass made to my spec, exactly what I wanted, measurements and all, and a combination of everything that I've learned through my journey through short scale basses. So I called Marcel at F-Bass and said, please build me a bass to these specs. And he very kindly agreed. We talked about it over the phone and we discussed the options that we had. I told him what I wanted and it was a back and forth dialogue. And here's the outcome. I took delivery of this bass not that long ago. It was about a 22-month wait, but it was well worth the wait. So this is the first F-Bass VF4 short scale. This features an alder body, has a 3-piece maple neck, and a Macassar ebony fingerboard. It has the Aguilar P pickup, and like my other basses, I ended up getting the slotted vintage style bent steel bridge. This one is made by Hipshot, and I think the folks at F-Bass approached Hipshot about making a custom bridge for this bass with a slightly tighter string spacing. So this is 18.5 millimeters, but it has the same slotted vintage style saddles. This bass is entirely passive, such as volume, tone, and I mean, look at it, it's beautiful. I'm still getting to know this bass because I only took delivery a few days ago, but right out of the gig bag, it feels like home. And tonally really fits the bill for me. It's got a nice 1.5 inch nut width, but it does have a compound radius, so it's a little flatter up here compared to at the lower frets. I love this thing. Let's plug this in. I have this also strung with Tomastic Infeld flat wounds 100 to 43. These ended up being the short scale version, whereas I have the long scale version on the other ones. You just end up needing to wind more string around the post. These strings are brand new, so they still need some settling in time. But like I said earlier, right out of the gate, this bass is amazing, and I'm really happy I got it, and it's well worth the wait. and it's fixed a few things I didn't like about the Fender. The Fender body has a very sharp edge right here, the forearm contour, and after a while it kind of digs into your arm. It helps that the body's a little smaller, but it still became uncomfortable to play after a long time. So we have a nice contour there. The other thing we fixed was the location of the horn and the balance of the bass. Short scales sometimes do have a bit of a neck dive depending on the weight balance ratio between the body and the neck. But this bass balances really, really well. I rarely have ever play standing up with a strap anymore, but when I did try it with the strap, it balances perfectly. On my lap here, the shape of the horn, of the lower horn here, keeps it from sliding off my thigh, which is fantastic. It's a slightly scaled down size body compared to their normal VF shape, which gives it a little more compact feel. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about this F-Bass. It fits my needs perfectly. So if you're interested in having one made, talk to the lovely people at F-Bass, and I'm sure they'd be happy to chat with you about your custom build. So that's my journey through short scale basses. I do have a lot of stuff here, and for clarity, I do want to say that I'm not advocating that you have, you know, a dozen different guitars or bass guitars for, you know, every different song. I do think there's something to be said about having one instrument and doing everything on one instrument and having the most versatile instrument you can find. I did that for years. I got into collecting basses as a hobby. There's a thrill of the hunt. And a lot of learning has taken place on this journey for me. This is kind of one of the ways I've chosen to spend my money. But certainly, if you find that one instrument that does everything for you and fits the bill, tonally, playability-wise, just suits your needs, all you need is one. So go make music. You should never play in pain, and whatever it takes to have you have fun making music, go try to achieve that. Thanks for watching.